The Rolling Stones' new album drops today, and our music critic is giving the octogenarian rock gods a big thumbs up. Stay with us to hear the Stones' first new tunes in nearly 2 decades.
Everybody seems to be ready. Are you ready?
If you were born in the past 60 years, it's safe to say the Rolling Stones have provided the soundtrack to your life.
The greatest rock and roll band in the world, the Rolling Stones! The Rolling Stones! We're going to have a look at you. We're going to see how beautiful you are.
The story goes Mick Jagger and Keith Richards met in childhood and reconnected as teens in London, bonding over the blues. In 1962, guitarist Brian Jones asked Mick to join his band, the Rolling Stones. It was named after a Muddy Waters song, Rollin' Stone. Mick said he'd join only if his friend Keith was included. Here's the band in one of their earliest interviews, 1964.
At the moment, the feeling is that the kids like you almost because their parents disapprove.
I think the appeal is mainly the same as any other pop artist. It's just they like the way you look and they like the way you sound. That's all there is to it.
200 million record sales, thousands of live shows, and a lot of sex and drugs. The Stones are still going strong. Today, they released their 24th studio album, their first in 18 years. It's called Hackney Diamonds.
They've been playing with bits and pieces across the years in fits and starts, but never booking a studio for a long period of time.
Andrew McMillan is the Australian's national music writer.
From what I understand, Mick got a bit sick of this approach and said, all right, boys, we're going into the studio in December last year and we're going to finish cutting a set of songs by Valentine's Day. So he gave them a deadline. They went in with a few ideas, but a lot of the material was put together in the studio.
The result is a 12-track album featuring collaborations with Lady Gaga, Stevie Wonder, Elton John and Paul McCartney.
It's always with a sense of trepidation that any Rolling Stones fan presses play on a new set of songs by them because they have a long history of releasing music and not all of it is great, to be honest. Funnily enough, their new album that's out today is astoundingly good. Like, no band that's been around for 61 years should be making music that sounds as vital and creative and hungry as this.
Come on!
The Stones' influence expands beyond decades and genres of modern music.
They've just had such a huge influence on music itself that it's impossible for someone who picks up a guitar and takes it seriously and studies how to play the damn thing can't be influenced by the likes of Keith Richards, Mick Taylor, Ronnie Wood, these great players who have been around and been a part of our culture for a long time.
In the 1970s, the band went big. Really big.
The Rolling Stones were the first stadium act, I believe. They took rock and roll from arenas to big outdoor venues, I believe first in the US and then across Europe and the UK and to places like Australia. This was in the early 1970s. And it was a case of they had grown too big for the indoor venues or they wanted to avoid having to play multiple nights in, say, 10,000 capacity arenas. So why not book a 50,000 seat baseball stadium or football stadium or whatever the case may be?
You're hearing the first single from the Rolling Stones' latest album, Hackney Diamonds, their first original album since 2005.
It's a rocker. The Stones, in essence, have two modes primarily. They have rockers, they have ballads, and they went with a rocker for the single, and it's certainly an attention-grabbing song. It opens with a big riff by Keith and Ronnie, a big backbeat played by their new drummer, Steve Jordan, who joined the group a few years ago after Charlie Watts sadly died at age 80. It's familiar, but it's catchy and it's different. Mick doesn't have a lot to say in this song, but he is certainly an interesting character vocal. I just think there's a really great chemistry on show in that song. It was a great way to lead into the album and to reintroduce their creativity 18 years after their last release of original material.
In the video for Angry, 26-year-old American actress Sydney Sweeney sings along to the song in the back of a convertible, driving through LA, past moving billboards of the band playing live in the 60s and 70s.
It struck me that at no point did they show themselves as they are today, which is old men, and that's a marketing decision, right? So they're using historical imagery from decades ago and reanimating it using modern-day technology. It's a clever way to kind of put them back on the market in that way. And yeah, using a hot young actress doesn't hurt either. But at the same time, that was the first single, and they're not shying away from how they look. There's been plenty of press photos released around Hackney Diamonds, and they like wearing sunglasses in the daytime and black leather jackets, and they look like they've been on an all-night bender. Like, they've lived hard lives, the three surviving Stones. There's no denying that, and yet they are testament to the constitution of a life well lived, despite the harms they may have done to themselves through drug and alcohol abuse at various points in their lives.
On this album, the Stones haven't gone into the studio trying to reinvent their sound. They haven't experimented with new technologies or tried to follow any modern trends. This album just sounds like, well, a Rolling Stones album.
It's so weird to hear these 80-year-old blokes sounding like their younger selves. They're not trying to sound young, they're not trying to ape their earlier material, but it's unavoidable to hear their younger selves in what they're putting out now. Like Mick's vocal delivery, he is occupying that same persona that he did in the 60s and 70s where they made their most famous music. And he's aged so much since then, and yet he still has this really inimitable, unusual, peculiar vocal style.
There's some big names on the record. This song features Lady Gaga singing and Stevie Wonder on piano.
One of the singles that's been released, Sweet Sounds of Heaven, where he kind of duets with Lady Gaga in the second half of it. They're kind of going back and forth, screaming at each other like old blues singers were. But it's an amazing combination.
Other collaborations include Elton John playing piano on a track and Paul McCartney playing bass.
It's given me goosebumps just talking about it. It's fascinating to hear Paul McCartney playing bass. You don't hear his voice, you just hear his bass playing. It's this really distorted punk rock style line that he's playing quite ferociously. And then in the midsection, in the bridge, you hear Mick introduce Paul by name and say... So you hear Paul McCartney play a bass solo for a few bars in a Rolling Stones song.
The album ends with a cover of the Muddy Waters track, Rolling Stone. So, is this their final album? Andrew says no.
Mick has said in several interviews that they had recorded about 3/4 of what could be another album in these sessions. So against the odds, they have this a massive amount of material flowing through them still.
Andrew McMillan is the Australian's national music correspondent. As the Men's Cricket World Cup heats up, Pakistan great Wasim Akram says Mitchell Starc is the second best test bowler in the past 20 years. Akram says the only better talent he's seen is South Africa's Dale Steyn. Australia faces Sri Lanka on Monday and Pakistan next Friday. Thanks for joining us on The Front. Our team is Kristen Amiet, Lia Tsamoglou, Tiffany Dimmack, Jasper Leak and me. Don't forget to check out all the nation's best journalism right now at theaustralian.com.au.